After the pandemic ended, if women continued to work from home or had the opportunity to work from home, they actually had more of an uptick in family relationships.
But the option for flexibility actually extends to flexible time, flexible load.
Welcome to Singapore Unpacked, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies Singapore, where we turn research into conversation and policy into stories. I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director and also a former journalist. So with COVID-19 pandemic normalising work from home arrangements and more Singaporeans having to care for young children or seniors, there's this guidelines for flexible work arrangements which have been implemented last December to allow caregivers to juggle their careers and caregiving needs. But as global giants like Amazon pull back on remote work, and also, we also see local companies reverting back to work from the office. So how sustainable and impactful are these flexible policies for employees and businesses? To help us unpack this topic, I'm joined by two guests. We have Dr Tan Poh Lin, IPS Senior Research Fellow and co-author of a recent research paper on this topic. And we also hear from Mr Ang Yuit, President of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises, ASME in Singapore. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we'll start off with Pauline first. So we saw that your paper explored how flexible work arrangements such as teleworking are affecting women's work-life balance in Singapore. So could you share some key findings that surprised you?
Obviously, I think for us, when we wanted to look into how COVID-19 was affecting families, so we generally expected to find that because people couldn't go to office as usual, that they would therefore then reorganize their day, and that there would be a difference between how that affected mothers and fathers because of the differences in social expectations as well as the roles that mothers and fathers play. Now, I want to make it clear that, of course, we see that there is a narrowing of the gap between what mothers do and what fathers do. So I want to give credit to the fathers out there who are actually stepping up, to that challenge, which can be quite difficult. But what we did, of course, observe was that mothers actually reacted to the extra time that they had from not telecommuting to doing more childcare work. And we didn't see that as much, actually, from the men's side. I think it's because actually during the pandemic, we also observed that a lot of men actually did not have their commute cut as much, maybe because of the different industries that they were involved in. And also women are more likely to be in industries where, you could more easily kind of dispatch the tasks that you had on hand. That's also true throughout the world, that women were taking these jobs where it's easier to do work from home. So there were some differences there. Now, I don't want to say that it's generalizable to a non-COVID context, because this is a very specific context, maybe once in a lifetime kind of context. But it does align well with what we know from the general literature. A lot of women actually use it to perform household work, as opposed to men who actually use it to increase their productivity. Okay. So, for example, they will use it to enhance the time that they have available to talk to people in other time zones, for example, the way that they use flexible work. And so that's one finding. And we also found that it affects relationships within the household.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that has a long-term aspect to it. So in the short run, when women moved to work from home, it actually damaged relationships in the household.
Are you serious?
Yes, it did. And you can imagine why. Because actually, if you look at the lockdown period, right, for us, the circuit breaker period, what happened is that a lot of people actually had to work from home while caring for their dependents, whether it be young children, primarily speaking, right, but also for some of them, elderly who were at high risk, you remember, during this period, right, of contraction of COVID, and also the health ramifications from that. So because of that dimension of having to take care of kids who couldn't go to childcare during that period, and also working from home. It led to a lot of
conflicts. Yeah. I wanted to turn over to
Sure.
Mr. Ang Yuit, right? So, as the president of the ASME, I mean, now that you hear what Paulines say, what's your reaction to this? And especially since Singapore has just implemented the Tripartite Guidelines for flexible work arrangements.
Yeah, I think what Pauline is saying is very much in line with what we observe ourselves. Very fair. For example, COVID, stress, every day stuck at home, husband and wife have to look at each other every day. You know, I think if I recall correctly, there were higher spikes of divorces and marriage breakdowns during that period of time.
And even domestic violence, right?
Challenges lah. You're right. You're pressure cooker every day. You have no place to exit or walk away from the problem. I think quite interesting to hear about different dimensions of usage of flexible work between men and women. And glad to know men are taking up more household work, whatever that shape and form is, right? I think the leaning will be quite different for men and women. I look at myself and my wife with different preferences. And each one have a different strength and weakness. I think that overall, businesses are supportive of flexible work arrangement. The challenge is the degree of flexibility, and sometimes it is the specific implementations. Of course, flexible work comes in many shape and form. Most of us, when we talk about flexible work, we primarily think about flexible location, right? Which means working from home. But the option for flexibility actually extends to flexible time, flexible load. And there are other forms that gives you that degree of flexibility to do things, to work around your schedule. So let's say if you send your kid to school in the morning, you could offer to do come later and leave later. Or you could maybe even negotiate with your bosses to say, I only work 3/4 of the day at home and then I finish my work other times. So I think it's the flexibility accorded through the guidelines is meant as a starting point for conversations between the employer and employee. And I think the advantage of having a guideline in place, it facilitates conversations. And that's the important part. You know, and in our engagement with our SMEs, the most important thing to SMEs was, is it compulsory?
So they're not very welcoming, right, for on this kind of arrangements?
They are actually concerned about penalties. They're concerned about compliance costs.
Okay.
But if you look in general about the flexibility in SMEs, actually SMEs have a more degree of flexibility than most corporations.
Oh, why's that so?
Corporations are more strict about the rules. They have their own HR policies. So once you are not within that policy, you want to go out of it, then it becomes very tough. SMEs, because it's like family. So you can just say, hey, boss, can I come a bit later? Most of the time, your boss wouldn't say no. But it's never formal.
Okay.
So a lot of arrangements.
But some bosses also say no, right?
Yes. Some of them, they're not happy. They give you face and so on, right? So the guideline helps to help everyone bring a platform to say, let's have a conversation. If informal cannot work, then the guideline comes in and say, let's have it formal. Write in a request and then have a company respond within, I think, 1 or 3 months. Yeah. So that's what we observe.
Okay. So because we were also wondering why is it just a formal request process? Because from what I see from the flexible work arrangement guidelines, it shows that you need to consider your employees' request and then respond in 2 months, right? And you need to give a good business reply on why you agree to give the flexible work arrangements or you don't. Yeah, but the thing is, if I'm a terrible boss, I can still, in writing tell the person that I don't agree, right?
Yeah. If I'm a slave driver, right? So So in an extreme case, if I'm a slave driver and I'm not for any degree of flexibility, then this guideline becomes just a paperwork exercise for me, right? I just write in. My own experience dealing with bosses, dealing with people, like even in broader sense of the word, is that the process of having to document it on paper and then write out the reasons makes people think about why no and why yes. And very often it shifts them, allows them, and it also shifts them from a position to a different position, or at least it moves them to a new position. So I was also involved in the whole tripartite process. So we went from just flexible work arrangement to flexible work arrangement requests.
Okay.
Because we realized that actually it's very hard for a third party to determine what is flexible, what job roles can be flexible, what cannot. So what we decided after studying Australia and New Zealand, because they are quite similar Commonwealth countries, and we actually went there to interview a lot of different chambers, unions, organizations, companies, and was that most of the time you want to deal with the request process rather than mandating that everything is flexible, because then that creates a different set of problems. So for many cases, a lot of companies actually decided to make it even more flexible than what guidelines provided in some cases. And we do see that many companies also use that as an advantage to attract workers. So in Singapore, we start to see that as well.
So Pauline, what's your thought about this, that instead of mandating like the flexible work arrangement itself, but you mandate the request process? What's your understanding about this, and what do you think about it?
Well, I think that maybe at the industry level, it shifts the reference frame, right? So where is the starting point? What is the reference frame? It standardizes it. I think makes it a little bit more clear, because I think that, I don't know whether Mr. Ang Yuit also relate to this, that there's actually a information gap issue. It faces both workers and firms, if you think about it. So if I'm a company, right, and I'm thinking about what policies I'd like to put in and what I can let my workers go in terms of what I can let my workers take in terms of leave, I also have to think about whether or not what I'm doing is competitive.
Okay.
That means that I have to have information about what's the industry standard, what other employers are offering and what they're doing.
Yes.
So for employers, they need to know that what they're doing is actually competitive so that they can be confident to do it, right? They cannot be overly lax, but they also cannot be overly strict, because that will affect their ability to hire. So I think that because it's in flux, because precisely as you said, some of these changes are actually new, the trend is still moving. So as you said, Amazon changed their policies, right? So because it's in flux, there is no kind of like well-accepted, long-standing understanding, but rather there is updates all the time. But not everybody gets the same access to updates. So that's one informational issue that I think firms actually grapple with. Perhaps something that is more perhaps flexible, like the request system that you mentioned, can be more accommodating perhaps to when things change rather than the alternative. I want to just mention that information gaps actually affect employees too, workers also, right? Because they need to know, to some extent, they have to guess. When my boss says I can take leave, right, because the government put it in place for me, is my entitlement, what is he or she really thinking? Right? If I can go for, yes, I can take paternity leave, and I even can take it up to a maximum that is, these days much more than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But will this actually affect how they're going to, evaluate me later? And how about my colleagues? So people, when they don't have this information, I think that for most of us, right, who are in a position where we can lose our jobs, or when we depend on our livelihoods, our income, will probably err on the side of caution, of being conservative. So they kind of think in a worst case scenario, they would probably predict that people's reception will be negative.
Okay. Yeah. So, Mr. Ang, then, as what Pauline said, that there's information gap for companies, do they ask your association for help?
We ran a few situations where we had dialogues.
Okay.
So when we ran dialogues, a lot of the companies were very glad that it wasn't firstly a mandate from government.
Okay. It's not compulsory.
Yeah. Because to them, they're just concerned that, hey, can you force me to do things, not
Okay.
right? Of course, the only part where they're being forced is have proper process, right? To them, that's okay. The second part is where many cases, they feel that giving flexible work, very often working from home, is a no choice thing. They think that they have to give it because that's what everyone is doing. So they don't realize that actually it's still the prerogative of the employer. But when they saw what the flexible work arrangement request guideline was, then they started to realize, hey, actually it's something that I can negotiate or have a proper process in place for my company. So that allowed them to have a better place for negotiation and proper conversation with their staff. Even before the whole FWAR kicks in, right? They should have proper company process. So I think in that respect, it gave them a lot more clarity about where the boundaries are. So the main challenge about when we were sitting on the tripartite work group is which side to air, right?
Okay.
One side is labor, one side is business. How do you walk the fine line? And where I personally think where we did is a very nice midpoint where it sheds light to both parties, right? That there's such a thing, and please go and talk, and encouraging that conversation to happen independent of government intervention. I think that's a very good move.
Okay. So are the company take-up rates better now that are more companies offering the flexible work arrangements?
I think companies are more open to that. And in reality, I think many are on some degree of flexibility. Government's on 3-2. And like what Pauline exactly said, it's all in flux because some may be shifting, and for many, having a hybrid is a very good model. Personally, I love hybrid for various reasons, because traffic is one thing, right? And the inconvenience. But the need, on the other hand, to meet up and sync up and have that face time is so critical to understanding speed. You communicate so much faster when you're meeting up, but you don't need to meet every day. So this option really makes a big difference to productivity if you play it right.
So I think in terms of culture also, right, I think we do see that after the pandemic, people are more receptive, but there are some people moving back to, slightly back to the status quo. So, but in terms of culture then, Pauline, then just now you briefly mentioned about the employees being still quite worried, right? Do you think there's anything further that we can do to help to address these employees' worries?
I think that when you have a situation where people are acting in a way where they assume kind of the worst or a conservative scenario, and it is actually out of informational scarcity, right? It's not leading to the optimal situation. So for example, very concretely, I may feel that I should not take my full 10 weeks, let's say, of leave because I am worried that I would then be met with some kind of workplace reprisals from my colleagues who will resent having to pick up the pieces after me, right? And actually, that's not the case. Suppose that they overestimated the animosity or the resistance that they would face. It would be a suboptimal situation, right? Where certain groups then do not feel as comfortable asking for their entitlements or taking up the full extent of leave. So we still have a situation now, even today, where mothers take leave much more than fathers do. And that's actually also because there is more of a level of discrimination. I don't know whether you agree. More of discrimination against men taking their paternity leave. And I think that that's because partly of the social expectations. And I think for a lot of men, that element is very, very salient. The idea that I am going to be I'm labeling myself in a way when I say I'm going to take leave, because a lot of men are not caregivers, right? So they are
primary
not expected.
Caregivers.
Yeah, they're not the primary caregiver. So by taking leave, that kind of is a deviation from the base level expectations. That doesn't apply as much to mothers, because mothers, most of the time, you already expect them to take quite a bit of leave.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, right? I think if you look back at evolutionary, mothers, literally you have to rest, right? Because you gave birth and all of that, if we are talking about maternity. Fathers, naturally, people think, hey, you should be putting food on the table. That's very traditional
But is there
thinking.
more changes to this kind of mindset?
Yes,
then?
I think so.
That precisely because I think that because it is so difficult to move a social norm. Actually, when you have more information about how fast the norm is moving, it itself actually makes the transition a little bit faster and a little bit more likely to move to an equilibrium.
So you're moving the whole society, having that conversation, people get to know and things move.
Yeah. So if you can see, for example, you think that, let's say people might think that, 80% of people are likely to feel that they're being taken advantage of when their colleague goes on leave. But actually, it's more like 20% or 40%, right? So these unrealistic kind of fears are way overblown. This can help then more people to take the leave, and it becomes a new norm, right? Just as you see other transitions, like, for example, now that more people are becoming, singles, the backlash against singlehood fell when more people actually are doing it. So that one thing actually is that we do need to show evidence that society is changing in terms of its mindset. And
but I'm very curious about this gender divide, right? Like, because during the COVID period, almost everyone has the flexible work arrangements. They can work from home, right? But now that we are, gradually moving back to the office, do we see more women taking up the flexible work arrangements requests and compared to men? And do you think this actually, like, any considerations from the company's point of view?
Actually, on my side, I don't have the stats to look at whether male, female.
Of course.
But I think a lot of what Pauline is saying pertains to the maternity and paternity leave.
But maybe we can move back to flexible work arrangements instead. So do you see more requests from women compared to men right now since the request is formalized?
Anecdotally, actually, I don't see a difference between, because I think it's very much need driven. So if you have a guy that needs to take care of his mother, has caregiving duty, he would actually ask for that flexibility. So it's actually a bit different from the whether it's child related lah. But if you are saying flexibility because of child looking after kids, right? Maybe you have more where the mother does it because naturally, for whatever reasons. But broadly speaking, I don't really see a gender divide in applying for people having needs for flexible work arrangement.
Oh, okay, that's great.
I think there's also already a pre-existing selection effect. So if you really look at those kind of jobs where you need to work 60 hours a week, which may not include official work hours, but the kind of time that you take after office hours, I think that if you look at internationally, not just Singapore, most of the time, and you do find these jobs in the tech sector, right? This is male dominated. So a lot of men are willing to actually put in the hours, really, and these jobs actually attract some of the highest pay. If you look at it, these occupations where you have to spend a lot of time, definitely more than 50 hours, even sometimes more than 60 hours. They can be very rewarding in terms of pay. So some people are actually priced out, so to speak, in terms of their ability to devote time to careers. So some women already chose the so-called more flexible packages where they don't have to do that much work. So whether or not they are applying more for flexible pay, as Mr. Ang said, we don't have the statistics on hand, but we would probably think that it's more of a priority. Especially for, I think, mothers of young children.
So you are saying that actually for women, in fact, they've already made the choice themselves, is it? They make the decisions themselves to go for more flexible jobs and all that.
Yeah, I think that there was a report that was written by some of the NUS economists, I think, looking at a gender wage gap and why there is still a gender wage gap in Singapore. And one of the reasons actually they mentioned was the difference in, I think, occupational choice, if I don't recall wrongly. And of course that is, I mean, they noted that actually women have been catching up in terms of education.
But just a few years ago, it was 6%, right? The gender pay gap.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly what's the amount, but I do remember that they mentioned that actually there may be a difference in the kind of other caregiving expectations that women had to also grapple with, which actually led to the reason why they would not then choose those jobs that require a lot out of them, which also had higher pay. So that might help to account for why we continue to see a persistent, one indicator of labour market performance that may still be this gender gap.
Okay.
I do want to just pipe in because I think in my first comment, I didn't really finish up.
Okay.
But my research shows that actually after the pandemic ended, if women continue to work from home or had the opportunity to work from home, they actually had more of an uptick in family relationships.
Okay.
So during pandemic, it was actually a
very stressful,
point of
right?
contention. But after the pandemic, actually, it changed. So that correlation changed direction.
Okay.
From negative to a positive relationship. And you can understand also why. Because now they can actually move the time savings towards resolving some of these like conflicts that you might imagine. So one of the reasons why you might see that post-pandemic, working from home actually is not so bad for family relationships is that the way that people then channel their time savings, right? As you mentioned, the congestion that you avoid, having to change your clothes in the wear, office wear, put on your makeup, all this time that you're saving, what are you doing? You're using it to spend time with your children. You're using it to, put away some of the chores that would otherwise need to be argued over, right? So I think that has overall that kind of benefit that women are thinking about when they ask for
the work arrangements,
the permission to work from home.
So Mr. Ang, I just wanted to ask also, because we mentioned about the different kinds of jobs, right? Are there differences in the different kind of industries for the companies? Like, are there some that are more ready to take on this kind of arrangements, and are there some that they find it harder to do it?
Yeah, naturally. Typically, you just look at it into two broad types of roles. One is frontline facing roles. And physical presence required role. That's one. Then the other one is back office roles. So naturally, back office roles is a lot easier to be flexible when it comes to location. In terms of load, in terms of timing, I think both are okay. But when you require physical presence, right? Let's say a receptionist to greet customers, or a retail assistant that actually handles walk-in customers, that one requires physical presence, so you can't do flexible location, right? You can't work from home. That being said, on the broader level, I do hear of companies looking at occasionally moving some of these physical presence required job, right? To move them into maybe training, and then there's some degree of flexibility, or then rotate them back out, right? But those that require physical presence and frontline work would you can't flex location but you can flex time, you can flex even the load.
Okay, so I think we were talking about remote working quite a bit, so that's flex time and place location. Yeah, but is it common to have flexi load? Because I think there's some suggestions such as job sharing, all that. Is that common in Singapore?
I think it works, especially when you are trying to deal with. So what Pauline and I have been talking so far about is childcare, right? About caregiving. But you look beyond that, right? We're also looking at trying to attract older age workers. So when they're older, they may have to go through certain phases where they're doing physio, or they get into injury, because that happens more often. So then the load part may require to come in where you can flex a period where you're doing recovery, you do light duties, or even work, you don't be so intense, right? So I think that's quite an important part, that we allow for that flexibility. Yeah. So yes, we do see that coming in various shapes and forms.
Okay, so more like not just caregiving for young children, but mostly to accommodate like retirees and seniors.
The older
right?
workers, as the older workers come in, I think that's also quite an important part.
I'm just wondering, like, then because we talk about a lot about the positive side about the flexible work arrangements, right? But there's also some negative parts also, right? Like, if a person works at home for too long, is there an issue about loneliness and social isolation? And of course, we talk about the flexibility stigma just now. So, like, you know, maybe they might not be graded as well as workers who are always in the office. Is that something that we need to be mindful about?
Yeah, I think that it's very clear, right? If you don't have that physical presence once in a while, your overall bonding level with your team would be lower, or with your colleagues. So most of the time, at least you see in a lot of companies, they do at least once a week or once a month bonding sessions. I think that's very important. Your level of understanding. So of course it depends whether you are very familiar with all your colleagues or not, right? So it also depends on the maturity and the state of that team that you're with. But if you're new, definitely it's highly recommended that you do more on-site visits. And a lot of times during COVID, if you remember, many people lament the fact that they barely know anyone, especially when they first joined the company and when the whole thing went to lockdown. So it's a very important, I think, critical part where you get bonding, you know how each other work. And just doing a face-to-face, you know the rate of connection is so much faster than trying to do it over Zoom, right? So answer is yes.
Okay. How about Pauline?
You know, when we're talking about general things, are talking about averages, but actually probably the best answer is to look at your particular industry and particular situation. In some cases, I think that you actually communicate much better when you see each other. I mean, if we were doing this interview via Zoom or Teams or whatever, right? Probably I would not feel so close or
So at ease.
But at the same time, I do also hear from people that when they come to work, they ended up being so close that they chit-chat all the time. You know, you waste time. Not waste time bonding, but, you know, you waste time actually socializing to a overly kind of wasteful degree.
Yeah.
And also I think that Singapore does have a issue of always trying to raise our productivity. It's always been a economic problem for us, and part of it is maybe sometimes people spend time in the office for not very productive reasons, so that they are not leaving at very early, even though they actually are not going to do that much more work. That actually makes us look bad, I think, among the OECD countries or whatever, right? So in some sense, you don't have that much pressure to be wasting your time if you are not actually in the office present. So I think that's plus and minus. You know, basically everybody in some sense can look at averages, but then it also does make sense to be more tailored and specialized. So I'm glad that we do have that kind of perspective. The idea that actually it should be up to a specific set of situations, because we don't want to have overly rigid regulations as well, where actually at that point it doesn't make sense for that particular situation. Because if you look at flexible work arrangements, it can be seen as a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it can
double-edged sword in what sense?
Okay, the first one, I mean, for businesses and for workers, it will be a different type of double-edged sword. So maybe I can say for workers, and then Mr. Ang, you can say for businesses. But I think for workers, right, it can, on the one hand, really increase, for example, productivity, because you're not wasting as much time, and actually every single hour that you put in is full of meaningful activity, and it's actually, being used in a productive manner. But on the other hand, I think that there's also that, and it can also have social benefits, but I think that on the other hand, it can actually put you on certain tracks, career tracks, right? It can put you on that track of where people have already labeled you as the mommy, you're on the mommy track.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're not on the high flyer track.
Okay.
So when you already have that, and workers are concerned about that, they're aware that they could be seen in such a light. So I think for workers, when they look at flexible work arrangements, that's probably at the top of their mind, right? And I also say that at a social level, it is a double-edged sword for women as well, because it improves work-life balance for a lot of women, but it has the potential to actually, widen the gap between men and women. If let's say that, employers might think, oh, actually there's some safety to hiring men, right?
So they don't ask for the flexible work
It's at the
arrangements.
back of their minds, right? They can
Okay.
believe in equality, but at the back of their minds, they're also thinking about bottom line, right? How is my firm going to do? And they may think, okay, it's safer to hire a man because of these considerations. So I'll turn over to,
Okay,
Yeah.
good. From a company perspective, I think that is so multifaceted, right? You can leverage on flexible work arrangement to attract people. You can have it to improve productivity through the right usage in motivating people, and you can also use it to attract certain people that in the past you cannot hire. So if you have that degree of flexibility, you can actually, it's only good. The negative is fundamentally a lack of management or management prowess, I think. Because if you don't track your workers, then people malinger or they're not effective, you don't know. All these become downsides, right? But I think I see it all as overall management challenges. Because whether you offer flexibility or not, you're going to have that kind of challenge. They can be there and just warming the seat, right? And still not be productive. So I think it's just a different management style fundamentally you got to adapt to. I personally think that a strong company would look at it in a strategic manner to see how I can achieve it and change the management style. So it does require a changing of management style so that you're not clocking people by hours and physical presence, but you're clocking people by their performance. And I think that's very important. And as we go into an economy where you have that degree of remote management altogether, whether, it doesn't even need to be your local workers, but increasingly we also need to look at a mix of offshore and onshore resources, right? Because of skill set, ability, and also maybe in terms of cost, right? Your management tools need to be increasingly leaning towards performance-orientated ones. So I think broadly speaking, even in terms of gender hire, personally, I don't have a preference for either, because each comes with its strength and weakness. Sometimes,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, okay, I may be stereotyping it, right? But I think every single employee has its own strength and weakness. So even dedicated mothers, right? Even though they would have to take time off, I think for me, I make sure that when they are working, there's a clear goal setting and clear accountability happening. So I'm not too concerned about these other issues, So I think it's all management that fundamentally companies have to level up with.
Okay. Looking forward, actually, the question is for both of you then. What do you think is the future of flexible work in Singapore, especially when it relates to I'm saying gender equality, and also definitely like a more equitable like society for their workforce participation. Yeah, maybe Pauline first.
I think that these days the thought that's on everybody's minds are related to the Trump tariffs.
Okay.
So when we talk about workplace conditions, maybe I think people are thinking, is my job safe? Are we going to see smaller profit margins? When this type of uncertainty creeps in this kind of scenario of lower profitability, of this kind of talk of big changes where you may see people uprooting, going somewhere else. This kind of talk is probably unsettling. So I think that does not bode well, if you ask me, to the labour side in terms of the relative balance of power. I think that is probably then not so positive in terms of outlook, just from that perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about Mr. Ang?
Yeah, I think that companies increasingly are looking at what tools they can have to optimize themselves. So I feel that flexible work or flexibility, right, at work will increasingly be used to optimize strength, optimize headcount, optimize competencies across gender, age group, geographies even. So I see it actually continuing. And in Singapore enterprises, I think the key is improving their management capability and performance tracking across the board.
Yeah, it's like a learning process, right? When you gain from learning, it becomes a more sustainable practice.
Then it becomes embedded into your culture, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Poh Lin. Thank you, Mr. Ang, for joining us for today's episode. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us.
If you enjoyed this episode, do follow or subscribe to the show, leave a rating, or share with your friends and family. Thank you all for listening. See you on the next episode of Singapore Unpacked.